Around the mid-70s, we lived in a neighborhood called Pilsen in Chicago. One of my aunts lived across the street. I used to love to go over there to be with my cousins. The houses in Pilsen are really big, old structures. It was an old, predominantly immigrant neighborhood, but the houses are Victorian style. They have a big living room, big dining rooms, small bedrooms, big kitchens, a lot of hidden closets and little places where you can play hide and go seek. They had little crawl spaces in some of the closets. Those were our favorite places to play. In my cousin's house, there was a closet that had little stairs. Inside the little stairs was another little crawl space. We used to go in there and talk about the things that kids talk about, but you can hear things that were going on in the other rooms. One time, me and my cousins were playing in there, and we heard my uncle. My aunts did not like him. They called him a brujo, a bad man or a witch. My aunt had been married and left her husband to go with this uncle. They all said that he had practiced witchcraft on her to get her to go with him. That was unheard of at that time, for someone to leave their first husband and to go with someone else. And he was much, much older than my aunt, much older. Most of my aunts were afraid of him. My uncle, he was calling out to things. He was saying bad words, calling for revenge, and we got scared. My cousins were telling me he sometimes does that when he gets angry at people. We're not supposed to go into his room or talk to him. We heard him stop and walk out of the room. I went into his room, into his closet. We found a little box, a little black box. Inside of it were little bottles of oils, hair, crosses. He caught us looking in there. He yelled at his kids, "What are you doing in here? You're never supposed to come in here." I got really scared, and he told me to go home. I went home. I was really scared. My mom asked me, "What happened? What did you do over there?" Because my aunt called her and said that I had been misbehaving and not to come back. My mom really reprimanded me very much. I was very sorry. She told me to apologize to my aunt and uncle, which I did. I couldn't get out of my mind the stuff that happened with the closet and the things that I found. I was sitting with my dad in the kitchen. I used to wait for my dad to get home to eat with him. My dad was a very religious man. He was always in the church. He was a deacon. Every time I had a problem at school or anything, I would always see him reading his Bible. He would always say, "There's a story in the Bible about that, about bullying." If I had a problem with my brother, he would say, "You know the story of Joseph? He had problems with his brother." He was always talking to me about the Bible. I told him what happened. He was furious, very upset. He dropped his plate of frijoles, grabbed me from my hand, and started opening the door to go across the street. He grabbed me and didn't say a word. My dad knocked on their door. He confronted my uncle. He said, "I don't ever want you to expose my daughter to any of that kind of stuff. You shouldn't do that to your children either." He looked at me and didn't say anything. My dad just left. And he said, "You don't ever have to be afraid to tell me anything like that again." After that happened, one day I was home sick from school. I heard the doorbell ring. This happened a couple of weeks later. I opened the door. It was my uncle. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. My aunt wasn't with him. I didn't know why he was there. I told my mom, my uncle's here. She was surprised also. She said, okay, let him in. She told me to keep him in the living room. I just stayed there with him. I didn't talk to him and put my head down. He said, come here. I didn't want to go to him, so my mom called him to have some coffee in the kitchen, and he left right away. I don't know what he came to tell my mother that day. Whatever it was, it scared my mom. That same night, I went to sleep. I shared a room with my little brother. Something that caught my attention. I saw a light coming in through the corner of my bedroom. As I looked up, I saw a man. He had an old chauffeur kind of uniform on, and he had dark glasses on. His skin was really pale. I could just see his hand. His hand had a black ring on it. I could see the buttons of his jacket. He was looking at me. His face was so pale, his lips were blackish. He looked at me and he had the dark glasses. I could see he was looking straight at me. He just stayed there, staring, peeking. I just froze and I tried to pretend that it was a dream. I know I saw him. I kept closing my eyes and opening them again. He was still there. He pointing at me and nodding, yes. I let out a scream and called for my mom. My mom came into the room and said, "What's going on?" I said, I saw this man. She said, "Oh, you're just dreaming. Don't worry. You did something you shouldn't have done, and now you're feeling bad. That's why you can't sleep." She stayed with me and she prayed with me. I went to sleep when she was next to me. I was very rattled for the next few days. Another night, I was asleep. I heard a thump right in front of my bed, a big thump. I opened my eyes and I saw like a cane that looked like a rain cane, a cane that makes the sound of rain. It was being held by a woman in a dark dress. There was a little girl with her that had sunken eyes. She had blondish hair. The little girl was so sad. She was being held by the wrist by this woman. The other hand she had on that cane. She looked at me and she thumped again real hard on the floor. I knew she wanted me to get up. She was staring down at me. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen. She thumped again. I knew that I had to get up. I sat up in my bed and she moved out of my way towards the door to go out into the dining room. So I looked at her. She looked back at me like, "Are you coming?" I got up. I started to follow them into the living room. I don't know why I started to follow them. I knew I had to. I knew I did. I walked into the parlor, what looked like a parlor. The whole living room was different. We had a fireplace, a real fireplace in the home. My mom always put a chair there because the cold air would come into the house from the chimney. The chair wasn't there. There was a fire actually going in the fireplace. There were all these people sitting in the living room looking at me. There was that man. He was dressed in that same chauffeur outfit with his cap on, the dark glasses. He started walking towards me. I saw the room. I was just amazed at the room. The furniture was different. The curtains, everything was different, except that there was a picture of my mom and dad. I looked at it. It was my mom and dad's wedding picture. It was a black and white picture. And as I looked at it, It crashed down on the floor. Everything stopped, and I was standing in that dark living room. I was weeping and wailing. This time my dad came into the room. I was like, what is going on? What are you doing? I said, Dad, and I explained to him what had just happened. He just told me that everything was going to be okay. Nothing was going to happen. He believed me. And my mom came and said, I think she's just making things up. My dad said, no, I do believe my daughter. Leave her alone. I was crying. I went back into the room. I couldn't get that out of my mind. Through the weeks, the teachers started to send notes home to my parents saying what was wrong with me. My grades were dropping. There was a lot of arguing in the house. My mom and dad were fighting all the time. One of the arguments started to stem up because my uncle would no longer let my aunt come to visit our house, and I was not allowed to go over there. I told one of my aunts what was going on, and she came and talked to me, and she said, I know what's going on. I know he's a brujo. What you have is something called susto. He scared you. He scared you, and you can't be afraid of those things. You can't give that power. You have to trust that all is going to be okay. There's always a power bigger than anything bad. For everything that is bad, if you believe in bad, you have to believe in good. She told me the next time that woman came or anybody came into my room to tell them to go away, that you are not going with them, that you are protected. Do not allow them to take you anywhere. The next time it happened, a few days later, I saw the man again. This time he put his hand out like, you're coming with me. I said, no, I'm not going with you. I started to yell loud, no, I'm not going. I thought I was talking, but I wasn't. I couldn't talk, but in my mind I was saying, I'm not going with you. I'm not going. I was terrified of him. He started to walk towards me. At that time, my brother started to rumble in his sleep. I moved from my bed to his side of the bed. I lied down next to my brother and started to hug my brother. I closed my eyes. I said, I'm not going. I'm not going. I started hearing the thumping from the woman. I couldn't look. I kept saying, I'm not going. It seemed endless, but it finally stopped. It stopped. I felt like there was clean air. I felt it leave. I felt the chills, the darkness, the dampy smell, because it came with a musty kind of smell, like wet dirt, but with garbage. It's a smell you can't ever forget, the musky, dirty smell of earth. And it was gone. I didn't smell it anymore. Weeks later, the arguing between my parents settled down. Things started going back to normal in our house. They would greet each other. They would start laughing together. We started being a regular family again. It was at that time that my uncle and aunt decided to move back to Puerto Rico. They decided they were going to pick up and take the kids back to Puerto Rico. But before that happened, my aunt got very sick. She had to be put in a home. She had a series of strokes, and my uncle left her to live in Puerto Rico. After that, we heard stories about him joining some kind of church and getting arrested for hurting children. Eventually, my aunt and him divorced. We heard nothing from him again. My other cousins had run-ins with him. He died a terrible death as well. He caught gangrene. He died in prison for whatever it was that he did in Puerto Rico. I can't really say. I just know it was something against a child in a church. He was accused and found guilty. In Puerto Rico, he was a chauffeur. I think it was another aspect of him, because he was a chauffeur in Puerto Rico. He used to drive a taxi or drive people. I do know that he used to work for a rich family in Puerto Rico, driving them around. I found that out much later, but that would make sense why I saw him like that. None of them went to see him at the end. They're all good people. To this day, I adore my cousins. They grew up to be wonderful, wonderful people. They remembered their father with love, but not many of our other relatives agree with that. My aunt tells me how brave I was to be able to confront him. And that's a lesson I've learned. I have to always face my fears with courage. Years later, I would talk to my brother about this. I was telling him I used to be really scared in that house. He said, "Oh yeah, the lady with the cane, right?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I remember when she used to come into our room and try to take you away." I said, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" He said, "Because I didn't want her to take me. I'd rather her try to take you than to take me." He validated it for me. My brother told me, "No matter where I am, I will always protect you." My brother died in 2020 from COVID. I still feel him around me. Sometimes when I'm scared or feeling lonely, I'll feel his presence around me, and I know that he's close. I've also learned now that there are some things that are always good, here and in the afterlife. You can embrace those.